Right, I'm going to start with possibly my most pirate moment to date, which was when I was 8 at my first pirate party. This is me dressed as a mermaid when everyone else is evidently dressed as a pirate. I remember this moment really, really clearly because I didn't want to go dressed as a boy. So I made my mum make me this beautiful homemade mermaid costume with her sewing machine. Of course, the serious point of this picture is that despite my costume, I'm probably the most pirate person in the room, because if I was to sum up what Be More Pirate means in a nutshell, and you can leave the talk now, it would be giving yourself permission to break a few rules. And that's exactly what I'm doing here, obviously. I'm having a lot of fun with it. But up until this point, I wouldn't really have considered myself much of a rule breaker at all. In fact, when I grew up, I was quite good at ticking boxes, doing the done thing, being quite good. And I genuinely thought that that was the route to success up until about 3 years ago when I joined Be More Pirate, or began Be More Pirate. And I want to tell you a little bit about where I came from, because this is significant to why I'm interested in Teal and involved in, this conference and the movement. So I used to work here, which I don't know if any of you are from the UK or in the UK, possibly not, but this is a place called the RSA, which stands for the Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. It's a bloody mouthful, but it's a 260-year-old society turned social innovation charity. And that's where I used to live. And I've called it the Navy because, as you can see, it looks pretty traditional, pretty institutional from the outside. And it is really. Its mission is 21st century enlightenment. So it does see itself as a platform for progressive ideas that will change the world. But truthfully, I'm not quite sure it puts its money where its mouth is. However, back in 2014, when I was fresh and young, that was the first time that I heard of Teal. I was lucky enough to see Frederick Laloux speak at the RSA, because we'd invite speakers, authors who've got these great new ideas, and we'd invite them in to come and talk about them. And he presented reinventing organizations and so what it would mean to be a soulful organization. And I thought, wow, like this is amazing. And it sparked a movement within our network, because little groups formed, and so we can take these ideas, we can work with them. But it didn't really catch on. Like, over the next 7 years, whilst I was working there, I became increasingly frustrated at how much the organization would talk intellectually about ideas of change, but not seem to be able to put them into practice. There was this huge cognitive dissonance between what we agreed were good ideas, but what we seemed able to allow ourselves to do. And I was becoming increasingly frustrated and annoyed, but I was also becoming increasingly fascinated about why that was. That what was this gap? What was in it? And how do you get people to really change? Because I thought these guys were the change makers, believe me. And that's really what drew me to Be More Pirate. This was also a book that was was presented on that same stage in that same house. And to be honest, by that point, I was so disillusioned, I didn't really pay any attention to it. I didn't like it at all. In fact, I thought How to Take on the World and Win, which you can see as a subtitle, I just thought that, that clickbaity title, promise of change, I've heard it all before, and it just looks like good marketing to me. So Sam, who wrote the book, had just advertised for a right-hand pirate, which is, probably the most unusual job title you've ever heard. And although I'd read the book and, well, I'd been skeptical about the book, I had gone back and properly read it after a month or so. And I'd never seen change presented like this. So I applied for the job. And I went back to London and I sort of took him to task over it. I said, is your book more style over substance? And one of the other reasons I was so skeptical is because in the middle of the book, there is a 5R framework, and it is the only pirate pun in the book. But it's the 5 pirate principles that are there to guide you. And I just thought, again, alliteration is a nice marketing strategy rather than, anything real. And I've changed my mind now, but at the beginning, I was skeptical. The 5 principles are: rebel, draw strength from standing up to the status quo; rewrite, so bend, break, but ultimately rewrite the rules; reorganize yourself, which is really part of the kind of self-management, self-organizing part of piracy, redistribute power, and retell the story. So that's kind of how Sam had organized his thinking in the book. So anyway, I took him to task. I said, what do you mean by you want to start a movement out of your book? And he just said, I don't know. All I know is that I've been receiving messages from people all over the world describing the rebellions that they're starting, the rules that they're rewriting inside their organizations. And it feels like there's something happening around this and it seems to be taking hold, but I don't know what the hell to do with it. So he said, I just need some help. And that seemed like a really exciting and interesting brief. And so the first thing that I did was open his email folder of 500 unread emails of people who'd said, I love this book. So I picked them up and I started writing back, and I began meeting them, and I began hearing all these incredible stories from all sectors about what it meant to be a pirate in the 21st century. What kind of rules are we talking about here? Were they the same ones that I was frustrated with? What did it mean to write a pirate code? And that ended up, to my surprise, in a whole other book. I never had any intention to write a book, but because we could see how much power people found in hearing other people's stories, we thought, it made sense to try and capture them in as much detail as possible. And there are, like I said, there's a breadth in there. Today, I'm going to focus on the mindset aspect, which is really that gap between, I think, knowing that things need to change and what actually gets you there. And the one team that really did some work around that, I've put into the book, is a team at Google. They wouldn't usually be my first choice, to be honest, a really big tech company, but it was just one tiny team who really made an effort to focus on behaviors and mindsets. And speaking of tech, we've also done quite a lot of work recently with Salesforce, which again are like a big, what felt like an impenetrable corporate monster to me. But they have used Be More Pirates like such great impact. I couldn't believe it. But the one thing they said to me was, the problem is we've got all the technology. It's all there. What we haven't figured out is the human stuff. And I thought, yeah. And this movement, this Teal movement, it doesn't get the airtime that it needs. It doesn't get the airtime inside these organizations that it really could, where it could really do wonders. So yeah, I'm going to focus a bit more on mindset. One of the first things the community, this kind of growing network of pirates, shared with me when I started to answer those emails was the line that most struck them in the book. And it was, no one's coming to save you. And I always keep our Prime Minister up here as the kind of emblem of no one's coming to save you because he's so terrible. But it was that it was for a lot of people a moment of instability when leaders, systems, or institutions that they'd always relied upon for security and stability had somehow crumbled. And obviously we've all experienced that a lot this last couple of years, but it was that moment of supposed crisis that seemed to catalyze them into agency for the first time. They suddenly realized, oh shit, it's on me. It's up to me to make a change. And that was a point of real liberation, even if it was really terrifying. So that was a really important point. And I think what I'm going to talk to you about in this talk is you don't have to have a crisis to get that kind of mindset shift. It just so happens that is one of the ways it does happen automatically. The other really important mindset part at the beginning that I learned was literally the power in the story. I mean, we grew up with this version of pirates, the kind of cartoonish, roguish villains who are the bad guys, who are a bit ridiculous, to be honest, the Walt Disney versions of pirates. But truth be told, having a story and a narrative to talk about change was the missing ingredient that I realized that I didn't have in all my other work when we were trying to create social networks. And it does several things, having these characters that you're gonna hear about from history who have done something really brave. The pirate story is a real David and Goliath one. It's ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But having a kind of avatar, or almost like a disguise to step into, gave people a totally different mindset, just simply by thinking of themselves with a different identity, like a pirate identity. So the whole overarching story is critical. And what is the story? as I said, like we have this really false notion of pirates. Whenever I'm asked about, well, when I ask people what they think of when they think of pirates, I almost always get parrots, peg legs, patches, and planks, the 4 Ps. I like to put them into another illustrative framework. But only 2 of those 4 things are true. In fact, the reality of piracy is probably a lot more like this scene here. And when I say piracy, what I'm talking about is the golden age of piracy, which began in 1700. Around 1700 in the Western Hemisphere, when a group of ordinary sailors in the Navy decided that they had enough of a self-serving establishment that was really out exploiting and plundering the world via the British Navy as a vehicle for the British Empire. And it really wasn't benefiting ordinary people at all. They realized they were just doing the bidding of the wealthy elite, and that if they played by these rules, they were always going to play to lose. So they took a punt and decided to go off and form crews of their own and no longer give any profits back to the crown and simply exist outside the law. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because of course, that didn't make life easy, even though it was really brutal to be a sailor in the Navy. Being a sailor free on a pirate crew, you still had to face down all the usual issues of disease and bad conditions and weather. And so they had to figure out a way to live and work together and be effective that was completely in opposition to what they'd experienced in the Navy, without any of the cruelty and the tyranny that they had. And again, this is where what Sam uncovered in Be More Pirate was a whole host of completely new rules about how to exist together that was completely unheard of in the Western world at the time. The pirates had really a blank slate to work with. And so they decided to create some new ways of working that would serve them better. First of all, they gave everybody an equal say on all the decisions that were made on board a pirate ship. So 1 man, 1 vote. It was more democratic than ancient Greece. I should also say that pirate ships were really diverse. Before they even formed the crews, they pretty much let anyone on board. So you saw female pirates like Anne Bonny. You saw them free slave ships and bring slaves on board as equals. So it was really quite, well, diverse but unusual workplace experience for the time. They put proper checks and balances on power. So the one thing that they'd experienced in the Navy was terrible tyranny under Navy captains. So on the pirate ship was where you had the first form of dual governance. The captain and the quartermaster were equals on board. So they had shared power. Captain was in charge of strategy, quartermaster's in charge of the crew, the punishment, and the money. So those are the things most likely to be abused by a captain. And that meant that, yeah, you had a much better chance of avoiding conflict. And crucially, you could vote in and out the leadership at any time. I remember putting that question to local governors here in the UK and what that would look like in an organizational structure if you could vote out the CEO or vote out the head of the council. And they were gobsmacked that was invented in the 1700s. They also had fair and equal pay, so nothing causes conflict like money. Everybody got roughly an equal amount. You only got a little bit more if you had more risk or responsibility with your job. They gave everyone social insurance. So if you lost a leg or an eye in a battle, you'd get compensation, that actual monetary compensation, and a peg leg if you wanted it, I imagine. But it meant that people didn't feel their lives were expendable in the way that they were in the Navy. And pirates even had same-sex marriage. So if you were in a same-sex relationship, you underwent a civil, almost like a civil partnership, a legal and ritual ceremony that celebrated the relationship. And it was so sophisticated, there was an inheritance clause that if you lost, if your partner died, you'd get their share of the treasure that you'd gotten together. So, and even I should say, it wasn't even in just inside crews that pirates are progressive. You might think that pirates at least went out and fought other pirates, but they didn't. They actually were really, really collaborative. They were incredibly agile and networked. I, in fact, like to say that they're kind of the original agile. If they had a big battle to fight, they'd team up with other pirate crews and then they'd scale right back down. They'd avoid the kind of command and control structures that we live with today. They really were completely dynamic, and retained their independence. And one of the ways that they retained their independence was through the Jolly Roger, arguably the world's first brand, or at least, the most notorious brand. If you saw, obviously, the skull and crossbones on the horizon, you knew that you got that message, surrender or die, and most of the time people would surrender. So pirates were actually the least violent people on the sea at the time by frequency, because it was never their strategic aim to get into battle. Like, that was just a waste of resources. The Jolly Roger served a deliberate purpose to ward off attackers. So that's the retell part of the pirate principles. Weaponize your story, so that you, for strategic reasons, dramatize the impact of what you're doing so that it achieves your aims. So I hope that convinces you that pirates were more like pioneers than troublemakers. But a really crucial part about the pirate story that I want to emphasize is this. Pirates didn't set out to change the world. They set out to change their own world. They started with their individual desires and needs. They started where they are. And I think it can get it's really easy, and this is definitely where I was a few years ago, to get bogged down by a really lofty ambition of what change looks like, and then forgetting that actually all you can do is what you can do today and right now. And that might actually be the most important thing of all. So that's why I want to focus on mindset, because it really does start with the individual. And I've seen teams fall down because they haven't gone there. So when Sam and I started doing Be More Pirate workshops, because that was also part of our growing movement, businesses started requesting us to bring this into organizations and try and help them with their mindset. And what we noticed really, really quickly was that people found it very, very difficult to voice what needed to be said. So they would find it very difficult to be really honest about the problems that they were experiencing in like the day-to-day. I mean, I don't know if that's partly British culture. I think we're a little bit hesitant and a bit polite, but it was largely the same with global teams as well as we started expanding. So in 2019, we decided to do a little survey to capture or hopefully confirm what we thought was actually happening. So we devised a short survey that was sent out to a very, very small but representative sample of the UK workforce. And I'm not going to show you all of it, but there's a couple of questions that really stood out. One of them was this. I'll just zoom myself out here so you can see. Have you ever sat in meetings and verbally agreed to align around an idea whilst internally disagreeing completely? And you can see the options here. What we found was that 85% of people said yes. They were saying yes, but really meaning no. The second follow-up question that we asked after that was, thinking about that question, did you then agree but offer no actual practical support to the idea, agree, offer some practical support to the idea but not follow through, or agree and offer practical support to the idea while silently sabotaging its chances of success? Now, it wasn't quite as bad this time, but 64% of people were like, I'm literally going to move in opposition to the thing I've just agreed to. So what we kind of figured out from that was that people are saying yes when they mean no, and conformity is killing business. And we tried to figure out, what could we do to help people break out of that like dichotomy of dishonesty that was really holding people back. So we introduced a very simple practice of asking uncomfortable questions.
Alex, excuse me just a minute. There's just another minute or two left to the 20 minutes, just so you know.
Okay, I might go over slightly. There's not that much longer. Is that okay?
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and speed up.
No, don't speed up. We won't be able to follow you.
Okay.
I'm just doing my job and letting you know.
No, that's cool. So asking, a practice of asking uncomfortable questions was something that was because the problem is that in the moment where you need to voice the thing, whether it's, is this really a realistic time frame for our project, or are we really doing anything meaningful about this new issue that's cropped up, or I have sourced uncomfortable questions from all kinds of organizations, and it's not so much that you need to. The problem is that when you're trying to voice it in the moment, you haven't practiced it, and it's an uncomfortable moment. So what we would help teams to do is to form smaller crews within the organization that were safe, and they could go away and they could begin to raise some of those taboo subjects on outside of the usual meetings, and begin to simply practice and voice them. And that helped with people's confidence a lot, and also raised all of the topics that they were not able to raise in all of those other meetings. So that was part of like the first route into kind of helping people change their mindset, because the more that they were talking about them outside, the more comfortable they became with it, and the less scary it felt altogether. So the second concept, which is sort of this leads into that we talk about in Be More Pirate to get people into a different kind of mindset, is to go to the edges of your map, or at least explore the edges of your map. I don't believe that innovation is something that you can just ship into an organization in a sort of shiny product. It's a practice. It's something you have to embed in people's like day to day. And so what we usually say with going off the edges of the map is, first of all, do the uncomfortable questions. Regularly ask, what are we not saying? What are we not talking about? What's off our radar? Then take it to two other places. Who are we not engaging with? Like, who is off the edges of our map? What demographics, what kind of people are we not having conversations with? Could they help us solve a problem? Could they give us a different perspective? And that tends to open the doors to all kinds of interesting avenues. And the final one is, where are you where is off the edges of your map? What places and spaces could you go to change your, to give you fresh inspiration? Because environment has such a big impact on our mindset, and it's so easy to get kind of stuck in your routine, and we've all been working at home, but like really making the effort to disrupt yourself and disrupt the workplace in this quite habitual and deliberate way is part of the way that we encourage people to change their mindset. The other major thing that I'm going to just finish with really is what we noticed when we would ask people to break rules in workshops is that they would do the typical thing of going too big and too vague with them. And what happens when you go too big is that you can't achieve it. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I was surprised that in rooms of really smart and ambitious people, that they would not see that they were evidently too busy and too overwhelmed to achieve the thing that they'd written down as their new idea in the workshop. So we realized we were asking the wrong question. And we needed to ask people to take what we call small, bold actions instead. And there's a bit of a sort of theory around, we'll devise a theory around it to help people. But it taps into helping people to change their mindset, I think. It's got to be logistically easy for you to accomplish in the next week. If it doesn't, if you can't, then likelihood you're just not going to do it. Like the second you get back into the workplaces, your normal workplace day to day, the invisible gravitational normalizing forces that keep everyone kind of stuck will just subsume whatever you come up with, when you're having the great idea. So you have to commit to doing something that is so small that you absolutely can't let yourself off the hook. You're going to be accountable to it. But it's also got to be bold, because we found that when you just do small habits that are basically a bit meh, you have no momentum. There's no drive to do it. So you've got to find something that is in that sweet spot of like fear and excitement, ideally. Maybe it's just emailing somebody who you've never spoken to or you're a bit intimidated by, and throwing out your good idea to them and saying, like, are you up for having a conversation about this? And it's that giving yourself that spark of excitement, it's only gifting it to yourself. Like, if you can do that at least like once a week, you'll find over time that you just become more pirate. And I think that the major thing here with small, bold actions, which is where I'm going to finish because I know I'm running out of time, and I could give you examples, but is it's not so much that your small, bold action has massive impact to begin with, because maybe that's not realistic. But what happens is that when you begin to take a bit more of a risk, you change. And the thing I always say is like the inner rebellion is the hardest, but the first one. Before you're really going to make a big change in the world, you usually have to stand up to something within internally, some internal limitation. And so these little practices of small, bold actions, you start to test, push yourself that little bit further and test the water. And risk is subjective, it's different for everyone. So it's not about being a pirate, it's about being more pirate, pushing yourself a little bit more down that scale. And some quite remarkable things happen when you do. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.